We don't engage here on broader societal issues when issues are unrelated to our core mission because we believe impact only comes with focus. This did not go over well. Is that even speaking out on the conservative side of the spectrum? All Brian is saying is, we're not going to take a stance. I think there's this huge blind spot in Silicon Valley, and that they're not able to appreciate their own bias. And I think that's a big problem. Silicon Valley's echo chamber. Fortunately, I don't live in Silicon Valley, so I get to have a little bit of an outsider perspective. But maybe 1 or 2 episodes ago, we covered that if you just look at the political donations from the tech companies, the software tech companies, many of them platforms, but not all of them. It's very clear politically where the employees fall, on the political spectrum. So we covered that. I found some more articles here that further support that. I don't know if anyone really questions that. But this article is from 2016, and nearly all of Silicon Valley's political dollars are going to Hillary Clinton. And a nice little chart here. The blue is Hillary. The red is Trump. This article, 2016, just 52 tech workers donated to Trump's campaign. This is in CNN. They got this from CrowdPack. Both of those articles are getting their data from CrowdPack. I was seeing, did this go up or go down, right? Did the bias towards liberal candidates go up or down? And apparently it's actually gone up since 2016. This was one of the articles I featured, which is just going through different tech companies and showing, how many dollars were donated, 98% to Democrats from Netflix and 2% to Republicans. And you got Salesforce, you got Google in here, you got Microsoft, you got Apple, PayPal, Amazon, and Facebook. Amazon and Facebook, of the large tech monopolies, are actually the two lowest in terms of liberal donations, Democrat donations, at 77% each, and 23% for Republicans, for conservatives. Then they have some like Intel, like hardware tech companies in here, and that's the rest of the list. Those hardware tech companies do have more of a balance. This article, this CNBC article, is from July of 2020. But I wanted to make sure I had this right. So then I saw this article, tech companies aren't just donating to Democrats. I was like, oh, okay. Maybe this is wrong. A look at Silicon Valley's contributions to Republican campaigns. And so it's looking at this. And basically what this article is saying, you see these charts here, which look much more balanced. Democrat to Republican for, this one is for Microsoft, 52% Republican, 51% Republican for Amazon, and 54% Republican for Twitter. Wow, that's pretty shocking difference. Well, the reason is because these are PACs, these are political action committees. These are the company of Amazon, Microsoft, and Twitter donating to these political action groups. So this is kind of like lobbying dollars, which are split somewhat evenly. And then if you click the other tab on this site, then it shows you what the employees donated. And then it goes back to, it's actually even worse than the other stat, the other article I was looking at. Then it says Microsoft, which on that CNBC article said 77% of employees were donating to Democrats. This one's saying 91% of employees are donating to Democrats. Says for Amazon, instead of 77, it is actually 89% to Democrats. Twitter is actually 98.7% of employees donating to Democrats. I think it's pretty fair to say that there is an echo chamber amongst these large software tech companies based out of California or Washington, the West Coast, and their employees supporting Democrats. Now, is that wrong? Is that right? Whatever, you can make up your own opinion on it. But that fact is important to keep in mind when you hear about critiques of what, what's happening inside of the tech companies and what tech companies are then kind of casting their image on the rest of the world. And what that comes full circle is on this Coinbase. Coinbase is, I think, probably the largest tech startup Bitcoin wallet. I mean, they do a bunch of like alt currencies now, but it's the largest wallet for, Bitcoin and other alt currencies. The company's done extremely well. I think it's profitable, and Brian Armstrong is the CEO. Brian Armstrong wrote this article on Medium saying they're a mission-focused company, basically kind of laying out, here's our mission for the company. Here's what we're focusing on building. Here's what we need to be focused on. And then there's this little paragraph in here on broader societal issues and political causes. Broader societal issues, which is highlighted, top highlight on Medium, which says we don't engage here on broader societal issues when issues are unrelated to our core mission because we believe impact only comes with focus. This did not go over well in the Silicon Valley echo chamber. And why did that not go over well? Well, because, when you look at the idea of corporate activism on societal topics, that has not been relegated to tech companies. But that certainly has kind of come about, I would say, in the past 4 years. I mean, I go to all these business conferences and, you've got all these CEOs of the top companies there. And if you rewind the clock 4, 5, 6, 8 years ago, basically pre the current administration, being elected into the White House, it was very much so understood amongst these CEOs of publicly traded companies that you don't wade into these societal issues. And if you do, you do it selectively and rarely. Whereas now what you've seen in the past 4 years is you've seen it completely go in the other direction, where it is now almost expected that companies take societal kind of activism and take a stance on these issues, which can be very problematic for the companies, particularly if you have a employee base, which is, I would say, ideologically diverse. These tech companies, however, as we've just gone through, actually don't have a very ideological, at least politically diverse employee base, as evidenced by their donations and contributions. As a result of that, there's a very kind of opinion about, the role of companies should be to take activism on these societal issues. And one of these up-and-coming tech media journalists certainly would share that sentiment. This is The Information. This, I believe, note was written by Jessica Lessin. She is the founder of The Information. So she has 2 emails on this Coinbase thing in the past week or so. First email is saying, 51% of subscribers disagree with Coinbase's Armstrong. Okay. We did a survey, found that 51% disagreed with Armstrong, saying companies should engage with social activism outside their core mission. Slightly higher proportion, 56%, also didn't believe employees should leave a company if they disagreed with their chief executives on this issue. I would say it's not too much of a stretch to assume that The Information's audience, just like the political bias that exists inside of these large tech companies, I would imagine that their reader base similarly follows a similar ideological, weighting. Now, I don't have any data on that, but that would be my assumption, which means that if that assumption is correct, then this 51% actually might be very different if you were to poll, or if your audience were to be a more balanced population of conservatives and liberals. I continue. Next, and then on Saturday, 3 days later, she's getting a little grumpier now with this whole thing. And so the title is Why Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong Will Lose. What's he going to lose? He's going to lose his company or his stance on the topic. It was a blog post heard from Napa to Lake Tahoe. and all other places Silicon Valley CEOs are hiding out from the smoke and COVID-19. I mean, if that's not a way to start the blog post and exhibit this political bias and echo chamber I'm talking about, I don't know what intro will. So she talks about this. And then he said that the CEO followed up with a bold offer. If you don't like our stance on really a lack of taking a stance on social activism, then you can leave and we'll pay you 6 months severance to quit. And she's got a long article here. She is not a happy camper. But this is where I found it interesting. She's talking about finding their tribe, how employees and cultures are being shaped inside of large tech companies. She's talking about Google. She's talking about Facebook here. And, enter Armstrong, who clearly had enough. His solution, which is both practical and harsh, was to kindly invite those who disagreed with his position to leave. In fact, by offering such generous severance, he flat out tempted them to. Kind of like what we heard Tony say, the founder of Zappos, Amazon bought many years ago, a shoe selling company. He would offer him like $10,000 to leave. Actually, he did it multiple times on many things. And it was a good way to actually keep the culture tight. And so she says, I don't think they will leave, especially now. They, I assume being the people that disagree with Brian, their CEO. With the uncertainty around the pandemic and the money to be made in tech, I think employees, or perhaps especially the dissenters, will stick around and stay loud. Does she think this is what will happen? Or is she also signaling that this is what she would like to happen? It seems kind of personal why Brian Armstrong will lose. And not only should these employees not leave, they should stick around and stay loud. They should actually dissent, right? She's calling them dissenters. While CEOs and perhaps even the majority of employees are looking for a consistent corporate culture, some are not. They are perfectly happy, in fact, perhaps happier, to find their tribe within a company and to provoke any established corporate culture, often using the very technologies they helped build. What she's trying to do is cause not a mutiny, but to build a faction inside of Armstrong to not leave and stay vocal and dissent and not take his severance money, but to try and bring him down, right? And this is where they are, in fact, happier, is to find their group of dissenters and to provoke the culture. I'm using her words. These aren't mine. If these dissenters can't be persuaded to leave, can they be absorbed? Or will they just encourage more and different types of dissenters? Basically, will the virus spread to other parts of the company? My bet is that the scales will continue tipping towards the latter, which means you get your little tribe of dissenters, and then you recruit more dissenters into the tribe. Other grievances against the corporate mainstream culture that this horrible CEO Brian is cultivating, especially when you factor in the likely march of remote work, and that's a trend no memo can reverse. There's another part of this that I thought was really interesting. Saying what you stand for is the easy part. What is much harder, and I fear impossible, is spreading and enforcing that culture, because the technologies that have fractured mainstream culture into a million subgroups are doing the same inside our companies. And that's especially true in tech companies for two reasons. First, people who work in tech are savvy users of technology to communicate, vent, and organize, and always will be, making the spread of subcultures easy. And secondly, with few exceptions, consumer tech companies are directly embroiled in major polarizing social issues based on the effects of their products or simply their outsized power. I don't think that, what Jessica is missing here, or I don't know, she's not missing. What she's trying to bring about is that someone, Brian, who has an up-and-coming, very promising tech startup, decides to try to shape what his culture, what he wants in his company. And that doesn't line up with what the tech elites agree should happen, right? if he's not an activist, well, he's going to have to lose. And we, the tech elites, are going to empower and motivate and speak to the dissenters inside of Coinbase and try to get them to stay strong, don't leave, recruit other dissenters, and provoke the mainstream culture. When you listen to CEOs of any company talk about when you have, culture is everything, and if you have bad employees, you can have a virus. That's another way that many CEOs will speak about culture issues. And, the lesson there is to fire fast. And if you have a defined culture, and Brian points it out in that Medium article about what their value system is and so on and so forth, as the businesses scale, it becomes very hard to enforce those values. And I think that's actually what you've seen with these massive tech monopolies. They're hiring 5,000, 10,000 plus people a year. How do you hire all these people and still keep a tight, cohesive culture? And I think instead what's happened is you have these tech monopolies that do wield so much power and have these wildly biased echo chambers and wildly biased towards the left inside of these large tech companies. I haven't seen one shred of data to convince me anything differently from that fact. And instead, I think, we just played Zuckerberg's leaked audio from a couple weeks ago, where you have him saying, hey guys, you know that our biggest complaint from our users is that we silence conservatives too much. But, all the employees inside of Facebook, that one article says 77% of them are donating to Democrats, and other articles saying 89% are donating to Democrats, are saying just the opposite. Instead, we need to be regulating and moderating conservative content more. And all the articles in the press are that Facebook is here to support conservatives. So, which one is it? And I think what you're seeing is that actually there is an echo chamber problem in Silicon Valley. And it's gotten so bad that if any of these conservative tech people speak out, Brian's not even speaking out on the conservative side of the spectrum. All Brian is saying is, we're not going to take a stance. And I think it's pretty clear to say that the Democrat social issues, of which a lot of these companies have taken much more social activism stances on, many of which, to contrast what's going on with the Trump administration and so on and so forth. So if any tech CEO decides to take a stand and say, well, not even that he's going to support the right side of the aisle, just that he's not going to take a stand, that's not allowed. And we are going to deploy and support our dissenters to work against that CEO. I mean, there's something just really wrong about that. When instead you've got Jessica here saying that these people are tech savvy, they're really good at communicating, and they're really good at, taking insight. When in fact, I think there's this huge blind spot in Silicon Valley, and that they're not able to appreciate their own bias. And I think that's a big problem. I think that's a big problem in terms of how we see these large tech companies self-regulating themselves and moderating content and the policies that they put into place. And it's a big problem for these media and these journalists that exhibit a similar bias. And it comes through in their writing. And frankly, they're just very off base on a lot of these things. So I think there's an argument to be made that having a balanced and diverse culture is not only on demographics and race and religion and gender and sexual preference and all these other things, but it's very much so ideologically. And political ideology is a very big deal, as we've seen. And so I would actually say that these tech companies that pride themselves on their diversity actually have big diversity problems. And that can lead to a lot of these very contentious debates that we're seeing. That can lead to, if you read through her articles, why you actually have a lot of these leaks and a lot of this internal turmoil, is that you actually don't have a very diverse ideological, at least when it comes to politics, community inside of these companies. And so if you disagree against the groupthink, they will come after you, just like they're trying to come after Brian, who's just trying to take a neutral stance, the poor guy. I'd love to get Brian's perspective on this, and we'll invite him on the show and see if he takes me up on it. Hi, this is Alex from Winner Take All. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to leave a comment, ask us questions, and definitely make sure to join us on our next live stream.